Hello and welcome to episode 85 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Kevin Eikenberry. Kevin specializes in empowering organizations, leaders, and individuals to fulfill their potential through transformative and effective learning strategies. In this episode, Kevin shares powerful insights on how focusing on your audience can transform your presentations, emails, and one-on-one conversations. We also discuss the often overlooked importance of writing skills in leadership and why adapting your communication style to fit different contexts is crucial in today's world. Whether you're leading a team, giving a keynote, or sending an email, this episode is packed with practical tips to help you communicate with confidence and purpose. Let's get started. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Scott, it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Really looking forward to our conversation today. But before we dive in and get too far into it, maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about you, your journey, and the great work that you're doing today.
Well, I'm very fortunate, Scott, to have a great team around me, and we get the chance to work with leaders around the world every day. In the last 31 years, I've worked with leaders in at least 53 countries. The last time I did a count, and so we help leaders at all levels and organizations be more effective, which obviously touches on all sorts of stuff, including communication. And so lots of workshops, lots of virtual stuff, written a bunch of books. I've got a new book coming out in a few weeks.
Outstanding. What got you into that line of work?
Well, the short version of the story is that this work found me, and I'm doing the work I was put on the planet to do. I started in corporate America in sales and marketing, found my way into training and development there. Left over 31 years ago, left to start my own company, and honestly, I'm doing the work I believe I was put on the planet to do.
Absolutely love to hear that. It seems like leadership is a passion of yours. And just one thing that I picked on, very small little nuance, is I would say you're probably the first guest when I asked that question out of nearly 100 episodes that I've recorded so far. You tell me a little bit about you and your journey. Is you started off with your team. And I think, as most great leaders know, it's not about you, it's about your team. You're there to serve your people, not the other way around. So that's just really cool to kind of hear you kick off talking about your team.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and you know, when the company's got your name on it, I think that's maybe even more important, that it's very clear that the work that we all do collectively is something that I certainly couldn't do by myself.
Spot on. Now, as you're out there doing this work, as you mentioned, you're working with leaders all over the world, whether it's coaching, you're writing books, you're doing workshops and seminars. I am sure that you've probably, and even in your career in corporate America, encountered some really, really good communicators, truly effective communicators. Probably some, maybe not so much. We won't talk about those too much.
Well, there's lessons we can learn from them too, right? But
absolutely, you can always learn from the what not to do, so to speak, end of the spectrum. But as you think about that, when you hear somebody say that, Kevin is a great communicator, Scott has really good, strong communication skills, what's the image that is conjured up in your mind when you hear that?
I think the image that is conjured in my mind might be different than a lot of other people. And that is that, because to me, great communication is all about audience and context. And so the image that comes to my mind is ears, because we can't get all the other stuff right if we don't have that part figured out, right? And so many of the missteps we make as communicators come when it's about us or the message, rather than about the audience and the context. And so I guess I would probably think of ears. Not a very pretty picture, I suppose, but
yeah, it's a great visualization. But no, it makes perfect sense, because if you're not focusing on the audience, ultimately, similar to what we just talked about, it becomes about you and not about them. So you really need to tune into what's going to be important to them. And that context, I think, really is critical, because so much happens from the time it goes from your brain to your vocal cords out into the universe, into someone else's ears, their brain, and then they're processing it. And if you don't necessarily take into the context of how, when, their state of mind that they're processing it, a lot can be lost in that translation.
100%. And, at the end of the day, communication is message sent, message received, message understood. And only one of them is about us. The other two are about the other person. And we have control over what we say and how we say it, the mechanics of the communication. Mm-hmm. But the part that we can only influence, which is the message received and understood, the other person, is so important. And so to me, a great communicator understands context, understands the audience, and works to adjust, flex to meet where the audience is. And so many folks, if you think about it from like a presentation perspective, one of the places that people mess up so much is they're so focused on getting their content right that they miss all the rest. And even before we started, Scott, you gave me some things to think about in terms of our conversation, and they were both of those things. I won't give your inside stories, but both of those were audience-focused items.
Yeah, as you think about it, a lot of people spend, as you mentioned, so much time on their message, so much time on, maybe if you're giving a presentation, your slide deck, your visuals, they obsess over the fonts and the colors and the transitions and all that stuff. But really what they need to be obsessing over is thinking about their audience. And I understand that in every scenario, you're not going to have the opportunity to really drill in and ask lots and lots of questions, and know that in any given audience, there's going to be people with a number of different styles and motivations. But you can oftentimes, I think, start to paint with broad strokes a little bit as your starting point. You can research the industry, research the organization, make some assumptions about these are C-level leaders, these are frontline leaders, what might be important to them to focus on. And then a key point is being able to adapt. So if you're there and you're having a one-on-one conversation, or you're up on stage giving the keynote, as you're connecting with that audience and paying attention, you're going to start to see some things that this message is landing, or, ooh, I misread the room. I need to be able to flex. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people.
Well, and the only way you can do that, well, first of all, you have to know that that's useful, right? The ability to flex and adjust and adapt. But the other thing is, if your focus is on the audience, you'll notice that. If your focus is on yourself or your slides, or let's say you're turned around reading your darn slides, you're not even going to notice it, even if you want to. So again, it all comes back. And I was smirking or smiling while you were talking about obsessing about the slides, because I'll tell you one way you're always going to know a presentation is going to suck. And my grandmother wouldn't have loved me saying the word on a podcast, I suppose, but my grandmother didn't know what podcasts were. So here's the thing. Here's how you're going to know it's not going to be very good. If people say, well, I've finished my slides, I'm ready to go. That is not preparation. That's baseline, right? Like if that's what you're considering your preparation is, that you've finished your slides and hit save, it's likely not going to go well, because your focus, Scott, is in the wrong spot.
The slides really should be a tool that helps support you and support your message, versus your slides being the message. Because if the slides have so much information on that and it's so important, you could just email it out, call it a day, and you don't even need to be there. You don't want people so focused on the slides that they're not listening to you. And I love the point that you talked about people reading their slides, right? You got these people, they're just turned around facing the screen the entire time. You're looking at the back of their head. And we teach very specific skills to avoid that, and for a number of reasons. But a critical one that you mentioned is, if you're spending 90% of your time looking at the screen, you're not looking at the audience to pick up on those cues as to whether or not this message is resonating.
I mentioned, we've talked a little bit about how long I've been in this business, and back when I was in corporate America, even, I remember when PowerPoint was brand new. Like, I used to teach people how to do training and how to present, with an overhead projector, everybody. Some of you might have to Google that. But here's the thing. When PowerPoint was created, it was created as a visual aid. It was not a teleprompter. What it has become for too many people is a teleprompter, right? And unfortunately, they're turning around
Yep.
to look at it, to all of your points, Scott. And I think that that's a really critical piece. Let me just say something else very specifically, because the comment that you made a second ago, I think is a really important one, because people will say some people are in the meeting and some people aren't, and I need to put all the stuff on the slides for the people who aren't there, to which I say, no, you do not. Make the slides for those who are there, put all the other stuff in the notes part of PowerPoint. And if organizationally people start to know that, hey, if I need the rest of this stuff, the supporting material, I'll find it in the notes. Everyone will figure that out. You have to say that about 2 or 3 times when you send the email or send the Teams note or whatever, and you'll be fine. And then the audience that matters the most are those that are with you in person, or live, I should say, not necessarily in person. And so make that your focus of the slides, put all the other stuff that I'm not doubting might need to be there. Put that in the notes. That's what they're there for.
And I've met with organizations that in essence said that same thing. It was like, well, we typically, our way of sending out updates is sending out slide decks. It's like, okay, well, you don't want to plug all of that into your slide, because if you're going to use that in a live presentation, it's not going to go well, because they're going to simply be reading the slide, not paying attention to a word that you're saying. And I've done this exercise before where I go into my kids' classrooms and do some lessons for them in elementary school and in middle school on how to effectively deliver a presentation. One of them is I put a slide up there with a whole paragraph on it, and to test, are they listening to me or are they reading? And halfway through, it says something like, stand up and clap your hands 3 times if you're reading this. And about 75% of the class stands up and clapping. They're not paying attention to me. I could have been giving them gold. They're worried about reading what's up there. So it's knowing where the focus should be and what's most important. The slides are not most important. It's really the context that you're able to tailor to that audience based on the feedback that you're getting from them.
There's 2 problems with all the words in the slides, and you identified one. I'm really important. And the other one is, because since we were 5 years old and we learned how to read, when we see words, we read them. So it's the audience reading them, but it's, as we've already said too, it's us reading them. If we turn to look and they're there, then we're going to keep reading because that's what's there. But if there's only a couple of bullet points, or if there's an image that is connected to the point you want, whatever that is, then you can turn your audience, your focus back to where we really need to be, which is on the audience.
And similar to the overhead projector, when I started my career as a classroom teacher, and when I started, it was the overhead projector with the clear sheets, and I wrote my note outlines in erasable marker. And of course, being left-handed, I'd always smudge them, so I couldn't stand doing that. But it was a couple of key words. I did not write out my entire lecture. It was a few key words so that the students would be able to jot those down, focus on me, and then use those kind of as a recall mechanism when they are preparing for the test or the assessment. So love it. Kevin, in the work that you're going out there and doing with organizations today and helping develop their people, develop their leaders, what are some of the key communication skills that you really are seeing as being mission critical for folks? Either their employees have it and they're being very successful, or perhaps what are the gaps that you're seeing out there when it comes to communication skills?
Well, I think we've been talking about one, right? It's the ability to communicate ideas one to many, I think is a challenge. I know you've had many guests talking about that, so let's not focus there. I think an underappreciated gap is writing skills. Because if you go back 30 years ago, like, email changed the world. And it changed the world for lots of reasons. One is people, even at mid-level, they typically had someone that was writing letters for them, right? There were secretarial pools, and there were lots and lots of executive assistants doing mostly typing. And so now even senior executives are doing that themselves. That is a unbelievable shift. The amount of communication that happens both in sending and receiving that's done with not with verbal, but with written language is incredible. And that's not the way we evolved, right? That's not been human history. So I think we need to continue to help people, and we individually need to get better at our writing skills. And that doesn't mean we have to get better at writing prose or writing paragraphs, but we need to get better at communicating our ideas which probably means, in some of the same things we were just talking about the PowerPoint, bullet points, layout of content. And so often, because we think we need to do this instantly, we just start typing and then we hit send and then we go on to the next thing. And yet I often say, Scott, that one of the best lessons we could learn about email, we could learn from Abraham Lincoln, which of course make people look at me funny because clearly Lincoln didn't have email. But here's the deal. Lincoln would get dispatches delivered by horseback from his generals out in the field during the Civil War. And then he would need to respond to them with feedback. And as you might imagine, some of those messages that he received were things weren't going so great. And sometimes he was not happy with what they were doing, or maybe they hadn't done exactly what he wanted them to do. Not that any of that sounds familiar to any of you, but like he would do that. And then he would put that letter in his drawer till morning. Then he would read it again and decide if that's the letter he's going to send or if it's a different letter he needs to send. So intentionally saying, I need to put a break in here to make sure that I'm communicating what I really want the message to be received. And I think that maybe I think there's certainly times that we could wait till overnight as well. Mm-hmm. Don't have to start typing immediately when we get it, either when we're exuberant or when we're upset. And sometimes a little perspective from a little time, whether that's a half an hour or whether that's tomorrow morning, can be of great value to us. So I would say one of the big gaps is really, and it seems like blocking and tackling, but it's written communication, because it's so prevalent and it's so much about what we need to do that I think we need to work on it. And I will say another thing, and this is maybe more for more senior folks, but maybe not. And that is getting comfortable doing what you and I are doing right now. Not necessarily on a podcast, mm-hmm. but on Zoom, on Teams, on whatever tool you're using, on video. And I know we did a lot of talking about this with people. I co-wrote a book in 2018, back when Corona was still a beer, about being a long distance leader, called The Long Distance Leader. And we started talking about video then, back when few people were using it. And now people are using it, but that doesn't mean that they're using it well or mm-hmm. thinking about it, right? So for example, I have my laptop, even though the camera that I'm using is not attached to my laptop, mm-hmm. it's right up above here. Yep. But I have my laptop higher. Why? So it proves the likelihood that I will be making eye contact with the camera, which is the best I can do to make eye contact with you, right? Now, I'm also trying to look at you, to actually look at you, and so people that are watching can see I'm doing that, and I'm trying to do this. The point is, if that's lower, then I'm going to be looking down. You see the top of my head. There's all sorts of things. My office looks like a darn studio with all the lights that I have, because that I'm doing this all of the time. But all of us need to think a little bit more about that, because even as there's more and more organizations talking about return to office, for most people that are probably listening or watching us, Scott, they're never going to be in the office every day again.
Right.
And so being able to communicate with a camera is more important than ever.
Yep. And even if they are in the office, likely they're going to be interacting with people that aren't in the office, whether they have the flexibility to work remotely or they're in a different part of the world, a different 100%. Remote office. Absolutely. And yeah, I hop on calls sometimes, and it's a big pet peeve for me where I'm looking up somebody's nose, or it looks like they're literally an inch away from the camera, or they're across the room and you can't hear them. And they're all just little things that you can do that do have a big impact. As you mentioned, you might not have a great office setup because you don't do this, right? You're not recording videos or I've had a stack of books where I've had my laptop propped up on books and the camera up there. There's little inexpensive ring lights you can get online for probably $5 now to give you a little bit better lighting, or even just pulling the curtains, opening them up, depending on what it is.
Or closing them, depending. Because here's the other thing. We don't want to look like we're in witness protection, where all the light is all the lights behind us and we're all blacked out. So like it is little things. And I think we've gotten to the point now where everybody knows all the examples, the great examples you just gave, Scott. And what we need to do is make sure we're not that person.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing that we were talking about is the writing skills. And I agree that is a big, big gap that we see it a lot and hear a lot from our clients. And if I think about going back to my teaching days, how were students in high school and college taught to write, right? Very structured, your intro, your body, all these paragraphs, all these sentences. They were, in essence, graded on this needs to be an 8-page paper. This needs to be 4,000 word count. Not did you effectively get your point across and argue your case or tell the story. It was, did you do it in the right amount of words or characters? And so now that's carried over into the workplace where you have people writing dissertations that should be a few sentences and a few bullet points, and they're sending it off into executive leadership groups. And the other big problem with that is they're burying the ask, right? They're burying the question or the why or the what do I need from you? That really needs to be front and center. Here's my message. Here's what I need from you. And then if you need it, here's all the details and evidence that supports that. If you kind of almost invert the way that you typically write, you'll start to see a lot better results.
So a couple of comments about that. One is, we talked from the top about being a better communicator, focusing on the audience. And now as it relates, whether it's presenting, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's in an email, I like to think about what's my most desired response. In other words, what do I want my audience to do? And so everything, if I start with audience and most desired response, I'll get the right content. But if I start with content, then I'm writing a book report. And now I'm like, so one of the reasons people are not confident is like, I don't know all the stuff about this. You don't need to know all the stuff about this. You need to know enough stuff to get to the most desired response. But you can't get to that thinking until you flip it to make it about the audience rather than the content. And so it's about the audience and the response that you want from them. And when you do that, whether it's in writing or whether it's in speaking, then you have the chance to prioritize the right stuff. Much better chance of doing that.
Absolutely. Kevin, we've been talking a lot about, other folks, right? What's important, focusing in on the audience, listening, prioritizing our message. If you think about your kind of reflection a little bit, to be able to make a career of doing something that you really seem passionate about, that you enjoy, to be successful with it, what's kind of the one key communication skill that has helped you get to this point?
Well, I don't know. I always have trouble with what's the one, right? Like that's always a hard thing. But I will say being clear on why and being able to communicate why has been very helpful to me. So as a leader of my team, to help us make sure we're all clear on why we're here and what we're doing, certainly is important. If I'm leading a workshop or doing a keynote, helping the audience have a clear why at the beginning improves the likelihood they're going to pay attention and then hopefully take some action as a result. So to me, I think I've worked really hard to be clear about why, both in the like capital WY as well as sort of like small WY, and to try to communicate that as a way to engage the people I'm communicating with, whatever the context is.
Using why, whether it is at home or at work, can really make a massive difference, not only just in the effectiveness of your communication, but I think the buy-in that you receive for doing that. And simple as if the kids are wanting to do something, rather say, nope, we're not doing that because I said so, that's not really the why. Kind of digging into the why. Same thing at work. Nope, not going to do that, whatever. Or here's how we're doing it. Let's go. Providing that why, providing the context, or as simple as if I'm asking a question. And, Kevin, I ask you a question. I say, the reason I'm asking is that, to me, that's similar as a why, providing that context to people.
100%.
Context helps people process and understand, and you'll start to see barriers come down and they'll open up a lot more in their communications with you.
we could have done this whole had this whole conversation about context because it's incredibly important.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example about what you just said, and it relates to some of the ideas in my new book, Flexible Leadership. So I've asked leaders for years, would you rather lead for compliance or commitment? And nearly every leader will say, well, I want people to be committed, not just to comply. And yet, if we watch how people lead, more often than not, it's do it because I said so, right? That's compliance. It's just easier to just get yes, boss, yes, dad, than it is to actually have someone committed. But the only way that you get to commitment is by changing the way you lead, but also changing the way you communicate. And you're not going to get to commitment without a shared picture of why. And you're not going to get there by just doing all the talking. Notice I started with ears as my vision, because here's the confounding part of all that. I think most of us would agree that moving in the direction of commitment is the right and the more valuable thing. And yet it's not really an either or. There's a tension between the two, but it's not really an either or. There are times, there are contexts where yes, boss is really all we need.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And to try to get everyone to come to commitment on where we're going to have lunch might not be necessary.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there are a whole lot of things that we don't want just that. We want people to be more committed, to be more, I'll use all the words people talk about now, engaged, right? We want people to be engaged. We want people to be committed. We want people to take ownership. And that requires us to lead and communicate differently than just getting to yes, boss. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And a big part, not all, but a big part of all of that is the why.
Couldn't agree more. Kevin, as you think of kind of throughout your career, and everyone I think has their own unique communication style, right? Some people might be more direct, some people might be more visionary, storytelling, more focused on details or getting their message out there. But if you think about your communication style, who has been someone from really throughout your life, not necessarily just your career, someone throughout your life, could be at work or at home, who has had an influence on that style? And maybe what have you taken from them and made your own?
Well, there are lots of people that I've had the chance to observe their communication styles and approaches, whether that's in writing. Certainly as an author, there's been a lot of folks that I've learned a lot from that perspective. I don't know that I would have a person, but I'd rather, if I may, shift the question a little bit. So to more directly answer your question, I don't know that there's a person, but there are lots of people that I admire as communicators and have tried to learn from and adapt. But I want to talk about this point about style a little bit more, because I think that the problem with all of the style assessments that are available to us are that we misuse them. There's nothing wrong with the assessments. There's nothing wrong with those models at all, but they necessarily simplify a complex world. And then we further use those to justify or explain how we communicate or lead. And so from my perspective, at that point, they get in our way, because now they say, well, I'm this kind of a communicator, right? We could use DISC, we could use Myers-Briggs. It doesn't matter what we would use. And now I have boxed myself into that, when the best use of those tools is to understand differing styles and be able to move. If communication is about getting our message received, the question is not just how do I want to communicate, but how do I need to communicate to get my message received by other people? So understanding those models as a way to flex, right? Because you've got someone, and we used that as an example earlier. You've got someone that you're communicating with that's very bottom line thinking. You better get those key ideas in the executive summary at the front end of that email or of that presentation. And while that helps everybody, it really helps those folks. But if you're a person who wants to give all the details and all the background and say at the end, therefore, like, that's not working for that other person. And if we say, well, but that's what works for me, it's irrelevant. It's really irrelevant. And so I hope it's okay that I sort of riffed off your point about style, because to me, it's really about how do I need to communicate or lead in a way that works for everyone else. There are principles of communication that we've been talking about. Those things don't change, but our approach is it's necessary that we change our approach.
That's where I think, especially as you're talking about kind of these assessments, where some people do get tripped up with like, well, I'm this, I'm that. It's, well, yes, that might be your dominant trait, how you are, but really we're a blend of all of them. And ultimately, to what we've been talking about is we need to be able to kind of shift across based on who we're communicating with, what we either know about them specifically, what we might know about them kind of very broadly. If I'm talking with an IT professional versus a sales leader versus a COO, whatever, versus my partner at home, I know different things about them. So I'm probably going to shift my style based on the outcome, right? We talked about, we want to make sure this is the outcome that I'm hoping to achieve. This is my best case outcome. I'm going to probably shift my style a little bit based on what I'm trying to achieve and who I'm communicating with.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, Kevin, two things. One, what piece of closing advice would you have for somebody listening to this episode, something that they really should focus on taking away from this, maybe go out and work on? So a piece of closing advice. And then after that, if the best way for folks to connect with you, learn a little bit more about your work, and find copies of your books.
So if we want, I'll end where we started. That effective communication is about getting your message effectively understood by others, which means that we need to think less about us and more about our audience and what our outcome, what outcome we want. What action do we want them to, what response do we want them to have? And so my advice would be to slow down in all of our communications a little bit more and ask ourselves, what am I really trying to accomplish with this communication? In terms of what I want them to know, what I want them to do, how I want them to feel. And if we'll take that, and sometimes it's sleeping on it till morning, right? Sometimes it's taking a breath before we respond, before we start typing or whatever. So that's what I would say there. In terms of connecting with us, you can find all things about our organization at kevineikenberry.com, KevinEikenberry.com. But if you add a /gift at the end of that, KevinEikenberry.com/gift, at the end of that, we have a special gift for anyone who's been listening to this show. And there's a link there to our new book, my new book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. And we've actually talked about a few of those concepts today. There's a link there to buy the book, but I also have something free for you because you were here. And it's our, our masterclass on building our confidence and the confidence of others. And, Scott, we didn't talk a lot about that, but the best communicators have a healthy level of confidence, right, in themselves and in their message and all those things. And so we're giving that masterclass to anyone who wants it, who listened or watched us today. KevinEikenberry.com/gift. And of course, there's all the information there about the new book and how to get a copy of it there as well.
Very nice. I really appreciate that. I'll be sure to put links to all of that in the show notes for folks that are listening to this. And your closing advice about really, and I think the theme throughout this conversation, focusing in on your audience. One of the things that I always talk with people a lot about is a couple of easy things that you can do to start to be more audience focused, to see, do I perhaps need to tweak or change? One is just simply when you're talking with somebody, start paying attention to what they're doing. We hear so much about body language, what a big part of communication that is. Take the time to look at the other person, gauge how they're physically reacting to you is one thing. The other thing is start to look at your email communications. Go back through some of your email chains and look at the types of responses that you get to various messages. Are you getting one-word responses? Are you getting a simple sentence response? Maybe where other times with this person, you were getting different start to do that assessment of how people are reacting to your communications, then you can start to see maybe here are a few small areas where I can make some tweaks.
I love that. That's great.
Perfect. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I felt like we probably could have talked for an hour here, but I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. It was a pleasure to be here.
Take care. Special thanks again to my guest, Kevin Eikenberry. I hope you found Kevin's insights about the power of audience-focused communication, adapting your style, and leading with clarity as valuable as I did. Don't forget to check out Kevin's latest book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence, and grab your free access to his masterclass at kevineikenberry.com/gift. As we close this episode, remember that mastering communication is a continuous journey. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.